All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending today's webinar, Getting Started with the Snowflake Data Marketplace. My name is Justin Langseth. I'm the Data Exchange CTO here at Snowflake. Before I introduce my co-presenter, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, you can ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box that's on the right hand of the slides. We have a whole team of people sitting there waiting to answer your questions. So feel free to ask any questions as you go about anything related to Snowflake's data marketplace or Snowflake software. We have people who can help you. If you have any issues as you walk through the hands-on portion, again, please ask your questions there and folks will jump on and help you out. If we aren't able to address your question during the webinar, we'll do our best to follow up afterwards. If you want to learn more about today's topic, there's some additional links in the resources module of the webinar as well you can check out. Now, we're going to have a hands-on session about 10 minutes, starting about 10 minutes into the webinar. To use that hands-on, to participate in the hands-on session, you need to have a Snowflake account. You need to be logged in, and you need to be set as the account administrator or have the import share privilege enabled on your role. If you don't, there's a link you can use in the resources section of the webinar. You can use it right now, and you can sign up for a brand new Snowflake account that'll be all yours. Click on that link if you're unsure if you have account administrator rights on your account you already have, or if you don't have an account at all, click on that link right now, fill it in, and you'll have a new account right in time to participate in the hands-on section of the lab. This session will be recorded, and it will be followed by a brief survey. We appreciate your feedback on the survey. Let me now introduce my co-presenter, David Spezia. David, say hello.
Hello.
Thank you. All right, here we go. So we're going to have a couple slides. Then we're going to do a brief demo of the Snowflake Data Marketplace. And then we are going to do the virtual hands-on lab portion where you can all get your hands on the system and follow as David leads you through some very interesting analysis. So to do that, log into your Snowflake account. You might want to do this in the meantime as we get ready, or create one as we just talked about. Make sure you set your role to the account admin. David will show you how to do that if you don't know later on. And download the SQL document. There's a link in the resources panel. You can see a little picture of it here. Download that document onto your computer, open it up in a notepad or text editor of your choice, and be ready to cut and paste from that into your Snowflake workbook or worksheet. So you might want to do those things now as we talk about some other stuff. So that's what we're going to do. A couple other upcoming events you might want to tune into. We have a very exciting webinar planned on September 23rd. It's a joint webinar between Snowflake and our new data marketplace data provider, S&P. We're going to talk about how data and delivering of data and accessing data can be made super simple by accessing great data through the Snowflake Data Marketplace. On October 15th, a webinar that I do periodically called 5 Effective Strategies to Securely Share Your Data. You're welcome to sign up for that as well. And we have a webinar together with our partner Obsidian called Protecting a Cloud-First World with Consolidated Visibility. It's on October 1st. So sign-up links are in the resources section. I encourage you to join those webinars as well. So turning to today's topic of data marketplace and accessing external data. As the coronavirus outbreak took hold earlier this year, we saw a very interesting trend of our Snowflake customers, of pretty much 2/3 of them being very interested in getting their hands on as live as possible data about the coronavirus outbreak, and pretty much had an insatiable appetite for any data related to coronavirus or from the economic originally downturn and now a recovery. And we saw people realize that the data they need to plan for the future is not just data they already have in their data warehouses, but is data that they can get from external sources. And this really pushed that wave even faster than we ever imagined. And getting data, though, and this has been a challenge for a long time, is complex. You have to figure out, where to get it from. You have to figure out how to download it, how to import it, stuff like that, how to store it. Also, generally, it's costly to do those things, plus just to pay for the data itself and to pay to store it again. And it's hard to then collaborate and share that data with people across your organization, even if you are able to get it in. So Snowflake Data Marketplace makes a lot of this easier. And we really see the transition that our cloud data platform together with our data marketplace enables as similar to the transition from earlier forms of getting video to streaming video. In the old days, we drove to Blockbuster and picked up these videotapes and played them. Today, you just push some buttons and you can get immediate access to any video content in the world through streaming platforms. It's a very similar thing has happened for data. In the olden days, we used to drive to FedEx before the midnight cutoff to drop off floppy disks to FedEx them across the country. That's how we used to exchange data in the ancient days. But even today, people are still using relatively legacy mechanisms like FTP. EDI is still in use in many industries. And even dropping data into cloud file buckets, although it's faster, it still has a lot of the legacy challenges around data formats, data security, data access control, and things like that. So Data Marketplace and Snowflake's data sharing capabilities really enable data to be shared, exchanged, monetized, similarly to the way video has gone through transformation and now into streaming video. So you kind of think about it that way. So the way Snowflake secure data sharing works at a high level is providers of data, people who own data or have data that they want to share or make available to other parties outside their organization, although we also have an internal version of this called the Snowflake Private Data Exchange. But we're talking about cross-company right now. So people who have data, they put their data into Snowflake or they point Snowflake at their external data lake, either one. And then they can share that data with other Snowflake customers who have their own Snowflake account. And this works in a very kind of streamlined and efficient manner because the data does not actually move out of an account owned by the data provider. The data that is loaded or pointed to by the data provider stays in the data provider's Snowflake account or addressed from the data provider's Snowflake account. And the data consumers, when they access that data, they're simply following pointers that go back to the single copy of data that stays securely encrypted in the provider's Snowflake account. So the benefits are the data never moves and it stays in the control of the data provider. Also, the access here, since it is basically just following these pointers as I described, means that the access is live. So as the data provider updates their data, even on a record by record, transaction by transaction, second by second basis, the data consumers always see the latest version of that data with ACID transaction consistency, for those of you who know what that means. But basically, the consumers of the data who are accessing the data from the provider and the providers themselves, they're seeing the exact same copy of the data in the exact same state of the data at every instant. So it removes these latency delays that would exist if you were sending data any other mechanism. Also, it allows the provider to keep a kind of a leash on their data and that they can control who has access in a very fine-grained manner, can control it at the sub-dataset level, column, row, cell level if you want to. And you can also revoke access at any moment to the data that you've shared with somebody if you want to do that or change their access rights. And the consumers can start querying that data immediately. They can point all their existing tools if they're using BI tools like Tableau or Looker or anything. They can point that at the data that's shared by the data provider, just the way they already are pointing those tools to their own data that they might be storing in Snowflake. And they can use any mechanism or any tool to join their own data to the data from the data provider or from even multiple data providers. So some of the benefits of Snowflake data sharing, we think this is highly beneficial to our customers, and we see great use of this feature in general, and especially in the context of the Snowflake Data Marketplace. So what we found initially when we deployed Snowflake data sharing is that we gave people kind of the equivalent of a telephone, but we didn't give them a telephone book. So they could share data with other Snowflake customers, but they didn't know who was another Snowflake customer, and they didn't know what data sets that those other customers might have that they'd be willing to share. And so the Snowflake Data Marketplace is effectively our phone book for data, our app store for data, if you think about it kind of that way. It's a tiles-based interface. I'll show you a demo in a second where you can see who is on the Snowflake data platform, who's willing to share data or sell data or give you access to data. And it's a variety of kinds of data across lots of different industries. And I'll show some of that in the quick demo. And that quick demo starts right now. So let me share my screen using the magic screen share button. Choose hopefully the correct window out of my various ones here. Share. All right, I think I'm sharing the correct window. If I'm not, one of my colleagues, please interrupt and tell me. So this is the Snowflake user interface. If you're new to Snowflake, this is where you can create Snowflake databases. You can turn on and off Snowflake compute instances that we call virtual warehouses, although that's basically the compute part of Snowflake. It's also where you can run queries on your data using SQL and see the results. And it's also the place where you can access the data marketplace. And when you click on this white button in your Snowflake account, you will get into the data marketplace. And if you are on this Snowflake experience, you can also just push the Snowflake Data Marketplace button that you might find in the upper right of your screen. Either way, you end up in this section, and this will be where David leads you through the hands-on portion of today's section. But I just want to give you a quick tour of some of the kind of depth of data that's available in here. So in the Snowflake Data Marketplace, you can see some featured providers here. Right now, we're featuring some data from two of our financial services data and other kinds of data providers that these folks have. You can also see data that's been recently added to the Snowflake Data Marketplace. You can see the data also by topic area or category. So financial data, business data, marketing data, et cetera. Some of our friends from Wonderman are on the line today. Shout out to Wonderman. We'll be showing some of your data actually later in the demo that David will do. So there's all kinds of categories, all kinds of interesting things defined in the health category. So for example, in the health category, you can find data that is provided by other Snowflake customers who are providing, generally for free, data that is interesting to track the coronavirus outbreak and the economic recovery therefrom. And David will show some of that. But again, there's lots of other interesting data in here, especially some areas that I've focused a bit on in the marketing category. I mentioned Wonderman. Also, we have partners such as Epsilon, who does marketing. We have integrations with the Trade Desk, an ad platform that is used to serve ads. All the raw log level data from the Trade Desk is available to Trade Desk customers, for example. LiveRamp, and very commonly used onboarder in the marketing world, is available here. And the way these works is if you want to access these data sets, you click, for example, I'll click on the Trade Desk button. And here you can see more information about the Trade Desk data. You can see some examples of what you could do with this data. And there's two kinds of data marketplace listings that we'll show you today. One is called a personalized listing. You can see the green personalized banner. And what this means is that Trade Desk, if you request this data from Trade Desk by filling in this form, Trade Desk, if you are a Trade Desk customer, will grant you access to your data on the Trade Desk platform, but obviously not all the rest of their customers' data. So personalized meaning that you get access to your data, and Trade Desk is able to deliver that in a way that allows them to scalably deliver slices of data, or not deliver, but make available slices of data to each of their customers, privately to each customer, but still allow that to be set up and turned on from the Snowflake Data Marketplace. So we call that personalized data sharing. Another example of non-personalized data sharing would be some data that we have on the company called WeatherSource. And this is weather data. For example, there's data about 10,000 US zip codes in international cities, and our partner WeatherSource provides this data for free, and it's very deep. It has all kinds of fields. It has 15 days of forecast. It has a large amount of history. So it's a very broad, deep data set, and any Snowflake customer can just immediately click this button and get access to this data set and see the information that's in this database and start to query it and analyze it and join it to their own data. Which is what David will lead you through right now as we switch to the hands-on portion of the Data Marketplace Hands-On Lab. So I will stop sharing and hand it over to David. David, if you're out there, please take the helm.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Justin. Appreciate that overview. I am sharing my screen now. If my colleagues cannot see it, please go ahead and poke me and let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And the first thing we need to do when accessing Snowflake, of course, is we need to log into our account. So I'm going to go ahead and log into my account. And as I log into my account, I'm going to come into the old user interface. So today, I'm actually going to have the honor of showing you everything in the new user interface. So we have a new user interface which has some light charting capabilities, which really helps me understand the data a little bit better when I can take it out of result sets that are tabular and push that into some basic charts. And I can even dashboard some things, and we'll show you a bit of all of that. And the SQL file that I sent you, please go ahead and grab that from On24 if you haven't already. And when you click on that link, it'll download to your local computer. And after you download that to your local computer, you should see something that looks a little bit like this, a 460-line SQL file. You can go ahead and copy and paste that SQL file into Snowflake once we get there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my role in the top right-hand corner of the normal user interface. I can click, and then I have the ability to switch my role. And this is where I can switch over to an account admin. If I switch over to an account admin, I can expressly do all of the things we can do here if I don't have the ability to create database from a share. So what I'm going to do is switch role to account admin. And now I'm going to click on Preview App here to go into the Snowsite user interface. And so now I'm going to be coming to a new user interface. More than likely, it will ask you to log in a second time. Just go ahead and log in if you need to, and then go ahead and start a new worksheet. And as you start that new worksheet, this is where we want you to paste that SQL from earlier. Whoops. And I'm going to go ahead and actually copy paste my SQL. And I'll come back to the user interface and then paste that SQL. I'll have 460 lines of beautiful SQL that I wrote for you. I am going to operate from my own version of this because I've been doing some quality control and trying to make sure that everything works. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop these databases that I've been playing with. So I'm going to drop all these databases. And it's not going to let me because I selected all of the lines. I can only do one at a time. All right, let this run through. They've updated Snowsite. Did you see it multi-execute? I haven't seen it do that before. It kind of chunked down the right-hand side and did a multi-statement execute. That's fantastic. That wasn't there yesterday. So yeah, continuous release comes in handy. So now I've got the same 460 lines as you. So this will help us follow along quite nicely. And so the first thing we need to do before we can start playing with this data, if I try to use this database right now, you'll see this thing doesn't exist. So I don't have the database right now. The first thing I need to do is get the database. And in order to get the database, I need to go to a different spot in the user interface. I'm going to click on the Home button. As I click on the Home button, I'm now brought to a list of my worksheets because that was the last context I was operating in. And now I'm going to click on the data barrel. As I click on the data barrel, I want to be in the Discover tab. If you're in the Manage tab, it's going to look like how do I manage exchanges? You want to be on the Discover tab. And in the Discover tab, I've got 41 databases here. That's not what I want. I want to go to the Snowflake Data Marketplace. So I'm going to click on Discover, and then I'm going to click on Snowflake Data Marketplace. And now I'm going to see all of those beautiful tiles of data that I have access to that Justin was showing off earlier. And the first set we're going to get is the star schema COVID-19 set. So I'm going to go into the health area. So I'm going to click on health. As I click on health, you will see the different COVID data sets that are in here. There's actually 6 different COVID data sets. The one I have played with the most is the star schema COVID-19 data set because it was the first one that we had, and it's based heavily off of Johns Hopkins. So I'm going to click on this tile. As I click on this tile, it's going to bring me to a description of the databases. What is coming in here? What fields are included? This is what the data provider sends you, including some basic queries for how to query this thing, which is good to have. And if you needed to know more about this data set, if you click on documentation, they've actually got some really good documentation over their GitHub page for where this was. And this is where you can submit issues with the data. This is where I did a lot of early work. All right, so we'll go ahead and click on Get Data. And as I click on Get Data, it's very important that I'm in this role, Account Admin. If for some reason my default role is sysadmin, notice this is grayed out. It looks like a padlock. Most administrators' default role in Snowflake is the sysadmin. I'm going to switch over here to Account Admin. Now I'm going to click on Get Data. As I click on Get Data, this is the name that I want to have, because everything in this SQL file is fully pathed. If you change this name, the SQL will not work. So it needs to be star schema underscore COVID-19. Of course, I accept the T's and C's. It's going to say this is going to account admin. We're doing everything as account admin, but if you needed additional roles to have access to this database, that's where you would put this. Now I'm going to hit Create Database. As I go in there, now it's going to say you can now query data from the listing. I can go into View Database and see what's going on in this schema, but I don't need to do that. I actually want to write SQL. So I'm going to go back to my worksheets. And before I do that, I'm going to click on a couple of slides here, and I'll go ahead and present. So on the right-hand side here, click on this link to get a download of the SQL file if you haven't already. It's really going to help us. These are the two primary data sets we are going to go through today. And what we're going to do is, I'm really excited about this data set. I was very happy Wonderman Thompson gave us access to this data set. It's really amazing. And I feel I have only scratched the tip of the iceberg with this data set over playing with it over SQL. I'd highly recommend getting this data set and playing with it. If you're data inclined, you will really enjoy it. And so it's really built to define and inform those market level actions to identify risk, readiness, and recovery. So now that we've gone through a big swath of the virus and things are starting to turn in the right direction a little bit, now what areas are most poised for economic recovery? What was the economic impact to that area? Is the velocity changing and increasing? What areas that still have some populations that are declining, flattened, or coming back? Where should you start economic activity? Where should you wait for things to improve? So that's the kind of questions this data set answers, and we'll get to some of those answers here shortly today. All right, so back to my worksheet. And the first thing I'm going to do after I get that database, notice it has to be named star schema COVID-19. It's very important. Is I'm going to say I want to use the database that we just created. I'm going to say use database star schema COVID-19. Snowflake tells me you've successfully done that. I'll go ahead and execute line number 18, even though I don't have to. Use schema public. And now I'm going to describe the table that I have. And the one I play primarily with is Johns Hopkins University COVID-19 table. And so as somebody who's querying someone else's data, I usually want to know, what are the data types? What are the fields? What are the comments about this field? Because I need to know how to query this thing. And you notice that Snowflake has some additional metadata on column names, data types, and comments. And so I'm just pulling out that special bit of information from the information schema, which is our internal database about the data itself. And so now I can see these different pieces, case type, confirm, active, recovered, or death. So I'm starting to get some good idea on how I would probably start querying this data set. And then I always, as a best practice, I really like to understand, give me a limit 10. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play and get a limit 10. And now I can see the country region, the province, state, different data points in here. So and the number of cases. And what I want to understand with this data set is it's built a little bit like a cube. So if you do the sum of cases, it might look a little bit different. And so if I run this select query here, and as I run this select query, you can see when I run the sum of cases for the United States, it comes back with 457 million, which is higher than the population of the United States. So it has an additive, rolling count property. So what we want to do is query just for a day, or you can sum the difference. So I'll go ahead and run the next query down here in lines 44, 45, 46. And now you can see I've got the confirmed active cases, and this is accurate to Johns Hopkins as of yesterday, along with the deaths. And tomorrow, when I come in and run this again, I will get yesterday's data. I go yesterday's data. So it's constantly updating itself. When that new data is ready, I'll have access to that new data. All right, so now I'm going to look at the change in this data over time. Over running date piece. I can see the running sum count for the country, and you can see the US, et cetera. But now I'm going to see a chart. I want to look at a chart. So I'll go into the chart, and I'll change this over to a line chart. And on my x-axis, I actually want that date. So now I can see over time what's happening with this data set very quickly. All right, let's go back to the query. So we got some light charts in here. And what I want to do further is show you kind of how to start breaking this down. I'll add a column for case type. And now I've got a case type on the series. So now I can see, active, confirmed, deaths, and recovered, and the growth rates in those over time. So you can continue to break things down inside of Snowflake to see what's going on, even with some light charting. I'll go back to my queries. And now I'm kind of curious how the United States compares to other locations with greater than 500,000 confirmed cases since the 1st of June. So that's what this query is going to do. It's going to give me those greater than 500,000 cases from the different countries. And now, similar to what we saw before, where I had the line chart, I'll go click on the chart, right? So if I click on query, I can see the query. If I click anywhere on the chart, it brings up the chart fully maximized. And now, instead of my case type for the series, I'm going to change my series over here to the country region. And now I'll see what different countries are doing with the data set over time. And now you can see where the biggest acceleration is and where some of the gaps are being closed between certain countries. So now I'm seeing a little bit further where other areas of the world are hurt, not just the United States. I'll click back on my query. And now what I want to do is start joining the Snowflake data, this COVID-19 data, with other data sets. Another one of the interesting data sets that we have is SafeGraph, but I want to skip over this SafeGraph stuff today because I'm more curious about some other things. We also have weather data in this data set that can be got as well. I'll go ahead and get the weather data because I find it to be quite interesting and quite easy to graph and to look at. So now we're going to go get this other weather data source, and it's going to have a very long name. And this should be the default name when we try to go get it. So I'll click back on home. And now I want to start looking at COVID rates along with weather to see if there's any correlation there as well. I'll go back to the data. I'll click on the database barrel. And after I click on the database barrel, I'll hit discover and go over to the data marketplace. I'll click on the data marketplace. And now I'm going to go into the weather data area. So just down here at the bottom, I'll just go ahead and hit weather. And now I can see there's two tiles here. There's a personalized tile, and there's a tile with nothing on it. The personalized tile is one where I could request and enter into an agreement with Weather Source. The blank tile is a preview or a free view of their data set. And there's some really good stuff in here down to the zip code level in the United States. So I'm going to click on this data set. I'll go ahead and hit get data. And now when I get data, you can see I got this big, long walking name. And that's what I want because that's my SQL is hard coded to that name. I'll accept the T's and C's and I'll hit create database. And now I'm going to have daily weather data available for me to use. All right, I'll go ahead and hit view database. And now when I hit view database, you can see I've got postcode level data. And that's probably what we're going to be querying over. I'll go back to my worksheets by clicking on worksheet. And I'll open up that worksheet I was working in. You probably have something that looks like a timestamp like this. I'm going to click on my webinar one. And I'll scroll back down to the weather section. And so I've got the weather source data. At a later point, if you wanted to play with the SafeGraph data, here's some starter SQL for you. Feel free to go ahead and get that as this, but we're going to play with the weather data now. So starting in line 106, I'm just going to do a quick count star from this weather data set. That's one of the things I usually do while I'm kicking the tires on a table. And I'll usually do a count star. I'll look at some max values in certain lower or higher cardinality like conversations. And so I can see there's 14.7 million records in this data set. So I have access to 14.7 million weather data points by zip code by day. So there's some really cool stuff I can do with this data set. But I'm going to go ahead and just look at the average air temperature inside of New York. So I'll go ahead and run a quick query over this to see what the air temperature is in New York City. So I can see the days. I can go all the way back to 2019, October. So I've got about a year's worth of data in here, and I can see the average air temperature for the day. And if I wanted to overachieve, I could do a better sort on this. But I would probably do this descending. I think that's a better sort because I want to see what it was yesterday, not what it is a year ago. And so I can see there's data in there from the 8th of September already, right? So tomorrow, when I go to query this, there'll be data in there from the 9th of September. So it's great to see that recent data in there without having to physically copy any data in. It's just instantly queryable over their account. And now I'll join the COVID data together with the weather data with this one query here where I'm joining on the different counties of New York City. So I'll go ahead and run the query in line 117. And now when this comes back, I'll get cases plotted with weather. So I got cases and weather, and I could come into the chart here and I can see the average temperature over time. And I can even add a column in here, such as the cases. And now I can see the sum of cases, but instead I want to look at the cases since previous day. So now I can see some of the volatility of the cases and some of the volatility of the line charts here. I thought I had Slack closed. I am terribly sorry about that. All right. Apologies. I was helping a gentleman install Apache Superset and connecting it to Snowflake. All right, I'll go back here and keep querying. So definitely a data visualization and query nerd. I really enjoy it. It's a passion of mine. So now we're going to get to the main course here, the piece de resistance, the piece that I have enjoyed playing with. So I thank you so much, Wonderman Thompson, for this amazing data set. If I had the full data set, I don't think I would leave my office for 2 to 3 days because it was a joy to query. So thank you for having such great data sets on the American consumer base. So let's go ahead and get the main course here, the Wonderman risk and recovery data. And so I'm going to get that as Wonderman. So if you need to, go ahead and copy that out of your worksheet because we're going to get it just as that, or we can do some fancy deleting here in a minute. So I'm going to click on the home button one more time. As I click on the home button, I will then go into the data tab. So click on the data tab here. As I click on data, I'm going to go to the Snowflake Data Marketplace. As I click on the Snowflake Data Marketplace, I'm going to come down to the category of marketing data. So I'll go ahead and click on marketing data. And as I click on marketing data, for me, I've got this Amerilink's Insights data set. This is the one that you want to have. Marketing information on the U.S. consumers. This is the free to use version. There's also a premium version if you entered into a contract with Wonderman Thompson to get access to the full data set. We're going to have some fudgigated data for 1% of the American populace. So I'm going to click on this Wonderman Thompson data and Amerilink Insights. So I'm going to click into that. And now if I go ahead and click on more, so Amerilink Insights, this is the one you should be seeing. You can see I've got some information about what they're tracking, what they're keeping up. And I've also got the COVID-19 risk readiness and recovery data set. This is the area we are going to be exploring today. This is the area that I've been spending some decent time on. I actually enjoyed spending a lot of my Labor Day weekend with this data set, exploring it. I have a different definition of what fun is, but this is a great data set. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on Get Data. And so this big name here isn't going to work for me. I need it to be Wonderman. So I'm just going to do Wonderman. Or if you copy pasted from earlier, you can just copy paste that in there. It needs to be called Wonderman or your queries will not work. So please make sure you name it Wonderman, accept the T's and C's, and go ahead and hit create database. And now we're going to be ready to query this amazing database. So I'm going to go into view the database. You can see I've got 4 or 5 different tables in here. I got a data dictionary explaining what some of the categories are. I've got ailments in here. So are people suffering from respiratory issues or other underlying health issues which may put them at risk, such as cancer or diabetes? I've also got some additional royalty premium plus ailment. I'm going to spend a lot of my time on ailments and royalty premium plus ailments. So consumer level information and ailment information all in one easy to query table. Enough talking about it. Let's go query it. I get paid by the query around here. So I'm going to go to worksheets. As I go to worksheets, I'm going to go back into our working session. And as I go back into our working session, I'm going to scroll back down now. I think that's a good suggestion for a product improvement. Keep track of my cursor and bring it back down to where it last was. I need to feed that over to the boys working on this. All right, so we're going to run a few different queries today. We're going to look at average age by state and the 100K infection rate by average age by state. We're going to look at respiratory issues per 100K per state, so the 100K infection rate on respiratory issues. And then we're going to look at those two things together on the same scatter plot. And the same thing, I'm looking at income by state and infections by income by state. And I'm even looking at deaths by income by state. So some morbid things in here, but all this data does tell a story. So let's go ahead and get right in some queries. And the first thing I'm going to do, because I need that per 100K by state, is I've went ahead and grabbed some census data for you to just create your own database with. So I'm going to create a database called demo if it does not exist. A demo database should exist for you because all Snowflake accounts, the script that creates them with a demo database. And it says demo already exists, statement succeeded. More than likely, that's what you see. Now I'm going to create a table if not exists, state populations with just a state and a population, just real quick. I'm going to run line 149 now to create that table. And then I'll insert into this data set. So go ahead and run your insert into, and you should insert 51 records. And state is going to be our level of detail for the rest of this webinar. And so what I want to do is make sure I got the data inserted. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And now I should see my state population data set. It looks pretty accurate to me. All right. I always like kind of looking at the accuracy of the data I insert. And now we need to do some quality controls. So when I was making the webinar SQL, I decided to leave this query in here because I wanted to make sure that the 51 states were all ISO standard names and actually matched across the 3 different chairs that we have. So I'm just looking at the Wonderman state name, the population state name, and the province state name. And so you can see here, it says Wonderman PM2 DOP SMDP share does not exist. So because I fully pathed all of the data sets, I somehow missed this when I was quality controlling the SQL. So now we've got an opportunity to make it better. We're just going to highlight this little bit of syntax right here in line 211 and make it just say Wonderman. And now I'll hit play again. And now this query should execute for me. I didn't get a compilation error. We're not freaking out. Snowflake had told me exactly what the problem was. I was able to figure it out because I've been querying databases for 20 years. And now I can see I got back 51 rows and all of the data across of these match. So that's good. So that our state names on our joins are all going to be legit. So it's good to have some quality control. So let's first look at average age by state. There's a lot of data points inside of this Wonderman data set. And I have some tire kicker queries down at the very bottom of this. So when I run like my queries over a described table, there's hundreds of columns for me to look at, 863 columns from different ailments, the age range. And then if I scroll down a little bit, I've also got access to banking information. Are they a boater, bankruptcy, what different buyer people they have, buyer profiles. I've got retail profiles. I've got census information. Are they a caregiver? There is so much information here about the consumer base that you could build any index that you could possibly think of. Congressional districts, right? We've got different credit pieces of information. So loads of information about those individuals and households. I'll go back to my query here and I'll scroll back up. So I found it almost overwhelming for me on what to focus on for the webinar. And I wanted to do so much more, but I had to curb my enthusiasm a little bit to keep the scope of this to 1 hour instead of a full day. All right, so the first thing we wanted to look at was average age by state. So I'm gonna go back to line 220 and I ran this age by state query. And so I wrapped this try-to number over this average age. And so now as I take a look at this, you can see I get approximate average age by the different states. And that seems to check out. So this is households and household heads. And now I've got 100K infection rate by average state. So I built a CTE, or a common table expression, because I find it easier for webinars to follow along, where I have give me the cases by state, give me the state populations, give me the ages by the state, then join it all together. I could do all of this in one query with all the joins, but I find it harder to decode or deconstruct when showing people SQL to large populations. Now I can talk about it one subject at a time, and then you can see I'm joining on the states as we tested earlier. So let's go ahead and run average age by state and see what's going on with the 100K infection rate by average age by state. And so now I've got the cases per 100K and the average age per state. And we'll go ahead and throw that on a chart. And as we interact with the chart, I'm going to change this to a scatter plot because I've got two measures. On the y-axis, I'll have cases per 100K. On the x-axis, I'll have average age. And then I'll add a column in here for state. And that's the categorization. And now if I want to see all states, it limits the color on series to 8 because it's hard for the human mind to distinguish from more than 8 distinct colors. That's just a common way of doing data visualization. If I put 51 in here, there's an overwhelming number of colors and marks, but I wanted to see the state name on each one of these. So now I can see as the average age increases versus what's going on with the infection rate, this really all over the place. There's really no direct correlation. But if I wanted to get into smaller and smaller populations, say down to the zip code level, you may start to see tighter correlations than as something as big as a population by state. But you have the ability to drill in with this data set. I've given you the tools to start. It's up to you to go seek the rest of the journey. All right. The next piece on a lot of people's mind is, what about folks that are, kind of pre-exposed, have existing conditions that would put them more at risk, such as respiratory ailments? So when I started looking through the data set, I found all of these things which could possibly be a respiratory ailment. I'm not a medical professional. I'm just looking at these things and going, I think bronchitis, if I had bronchitis, I probably wouldn't be going out in public. If I had emphysema, I'd be nervous and I wouldn't be going out in public that much, right? So I'm just trying to put it in my own, like, snoring is probably pretty weak. You can easily delete it out of here if you don't think that's a respiratory ailment. But I went through all of these different ailments, and I have this great little coalesce where statement that says, if any things are yes, then put you in the respiratory ailments group. So I can go ahead and run this piece. And this is only 1% of the US population. So I cheated a little bit and said times 100 as approximate count. So our sample size here is 1%. So I've kind of cheated a little bit and put it out to the full population with times 100. And what I'll do now is I can look at these different, I don't want to look at the chart, I want to look at the results. So I see different states, different age brackets, and approximate counts of people with respiratory issues. And now what's going on with respiratory issues per 100,000 people in the States? Like, obviously Florida, Texas, and New York will be the top of any list along with California when it comes to US state populations, because they all have 20 million plus people. That doesn't tell me much. It's not analytically useful. I need to normalize that data so it's more analytically useful. looking at ailments per 100K population. So now I can see ailments per 100K population. Now I would be nervous about Ohio and Alabama, Kentucky, because they have more people with these conditions per 100,000 members of population. And so now let's graph that along with the infection rate. So I've got my respiratory ailments, my populations, and then the number of confirmed cases by state. I put as of the 6th of September here. You could change that to the 8th if you needed to, but this is as of the 6th of September. And now I'll go ahead and hit play here. So now we're running this big bunch of SQL on line 300. And now I got ailments per 100K and cases per 100K. And just like we did earlier, we're going to look at a scatter plot. So I'll go into chart and I'll click on the white space in the chart. And of course, I have a direct correlation when I have the same measure on both the X and Y axes. That should make a straight line. I'm going to put the ailments per 100K on the Y axis. And then I'm going to put the cases per 100K on the X. No, I want it the other way around. My bad. I'm going to put cases per 100K on the Y, and on the X axis, and do ailments. So now I can see as a group has more ailments per 100K, there's a very loose correlation up and to the right. So those areas with more people with infectious, with lung diseases, there's a slight upward correlation, but not much. The p-value here would be off the charts. But if you went into smaller groups of populations, you might see tighter and tighter correlation with the full data set. All right, let's keep querying. We have other questions. And this is one, I was actually working through this respiratory issues and the infection rate. And I was actually showing my wife this data, and she said, hey, what about the death rate? So I wrote the death rate query as well. So I'm going to look at the death rate query for this pre-exposed population group. And as I write the death rate query and I click into the chart, you can see that the correlation is still kind of there, but not quite as strong up and to the right as we saw with just the overall infection rate. And I'll go back to the query and we'll keep marching forward. We're going to look at now another area that I was really curious when I was talking to Martha over at Wonderman about this data set. I said, oh, you guys have income data. That's really interesting. I'm curious what the infection rate and death rate is for different income brackets. That's just an interesting data point. And so I wrote a little case statement to turn their buckets into some numbers so we could graph it. And so now we can get like the estimated household income by state. So I've done that, made a little case statement on top of that to just kind of take the floor of these values and then make a different, make a scatter plot of where the different household incomes are. Right? That's going to be a straight line, of course, but in the result set, different approximate household incomes in state. I'll go back to the query. And now I'm looking at the infection rates per 100 for these 100,000 population based on income as well. So I'm going to run this big block here in line 380. And as I hit play on that, now I'm going to get back the infection rates and the income rates for different states. So cases per 100K and approximate income. And I go to the chart and I click on the white space in the chart. And now it's getting me another straight line. It keeps doing that thing. So y-axis is going to be cases per 100K. And then x-axis will be approximate household income. So you can see there's a mild correlation here, but as income increases, the overall infection rate goes down a little bit. That's interesting. Just another data point to have when fighting this thing. And now when I go to query, this is a result I didn't expect to get. And I was actually quite surprised when I ran this 100K deaths by average income. It's not just the piece in here where it's the infection rate. Now I've got the death rate as well. So I'll go ahead and click back over on the result sets, go ahead and run this household income by the death rate per 100K. And as I do that query, I'll go to the chart and I click on the white space. I see as household income goes up, the death rate per 100K also seems to go up a little bit. I didn't expect to quite see that in the data. All right, so there's a desired future SQL I wanted to do. I didn't quite have time to get to. I'm just really curious, and this is what the Wonderman folks did with the data set, is they made economic areas that are ready to break out based on their recovery index or pent-up financial demand. that was a really fascinating thing. And I know they do some talks on that, and they got some additional information about what they're doing with this data on their website. I thought it was fascinating, and I was super honored to be selected to build some SQL for Snowflake and Wonderman during this data set. And again, we just scratched the surface on what is in this data set. If I describe this table, and then I can even come in here and start to look for metrics that I care about, like income. So now I can say, hey, are there income fields in this data set? Now I can see different income fields in here, and this was the one I decided to use. So that's how to use this data set. And I'll go ahead and give a quick summary of what we saw before I pass the reins back over to Mr. Justin. All right, so again, that data set, more information about it on Wonderman Thompson's website, as well as from our data exchange. Keep playing with that data set, it is fantastic. And so we accessed 3 different sources of data. We immediately were able to query that from Snowflake using the data marketplace. We augmented our data with ailment demographics and populations almost instantly. We combined data from those different sources to answer some pretty deep analytical questions in a fast manner. We combined that data in views for others to use as a starting point for analysis. So all these table statements, we could do create view as. We visualized and correlated data inside of the Snowflake UI. And tomorrow, when the new JHU data comes in, or the new Wonderman data comes in, it will be ready for you to query with your analyst with zero administration or movement of data. It's just there and ready to query. It's a very powerful feature of Snowflake. And with that, I'll pass the ball back over to Justin.
All right. Thank you so much, David. That was a great demo. Now we're going to have a few minutes for Q&A. If you have any questions about Snowflake Data Marketplace, Snowflake Data Sharing, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A console, and we will start to answer them. For any of you who had trouble following along or had issues with the connecting to the right database names, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar. So feel free to get that recording and step through any parts that you were not able to follow at your own speed and pause and stuff like that. And if you have any other further issues connecting to these data sets or errors when running the queries that some of you are having, please contact your Snowflake account team or Snowflake support, and we'd be happy to work with you and figure out what the issues were that you were encountering. So in terms of Q&A, we have a couple questions in here. Feel free to type more in. So the first question that came up was around the cost of data. And we got a question about data that's free and data that's not free, and how you know the price of data that's not free. And the answer to that question is, as I showed in my demo very briefly, the data sets that are personalized, they might be personalized either because they're a subscription fee that you need to pay to access them, or because they need to be sliced and diced just for you, in the example, that Trade Desk example I showed, or both potentially. And the way for the price data sets is to contact the data provider by pressing the request button at the top of the tile in the marketplace for that provider. And they will get in touch with you and inform you about how to get access to the data, any cost for the data, if they have free trials and things like that. So the request button is your gateway to be able to talk to the data providers about that, although many of the data sets and data providers have free data sets as well that you can also use to get started analyzing. Got another question about can we be notified when new data sources are added to the Snowflake Marketplace? So the Marketplace interface itself has a Recents tab on it where you can always go right in the product to see the most recent data sets that have been added. So that's one source. We also announce data providers in our social media channels, and we have a place on our website as well at snowflake.com where you can go and see a live list of the data providers. So we have multiple ways to get ability to see new data providers that are available. We don't yet at least have an email list or anything where we send out per new provider, but that's valuable feedback for us that we'll take into consideration. Got another question about when you get the data, does a copy of the data get pulled into your database? And if so, how do you keep it fresh? So as I know some of you joined after I'd kind of gone through my slides, but as I showed in one of my earlier slides earlier on, the data sets that you're getting access to, as we did in this hands-on lab, you're not actually copying them or pulling them into your Snowflake account. The data sets are actually staying in the accounts owned by the data providers. And when you're running queries against them, as we did in this lab, your queries are just accessing the copy of the data that's being stored in the other party's Snowflake account. So you're not pulling data into your Snowflake account. You're not copying the data. So therefore, as soon as the data is updated by the data provider, maybe sometimes that's daily, sometimes that's continuously, near real time or hourly, it just depends on each data set and each provider. But whenever that data is updated, you have immediately access to that new data. So if you just rerun your query, you would see the new data. So that's one of the big benefits of the Snowflake Data Marketplace. Got another question about if there is a contract with a data source or data provider in terms of how long that data set is going to be available. When you click on each tile in the marketplace, you accept the terms of service from the data provider. And if you follow that link for the data provider, you'll go to a page that has other information about that data source. And it depends on the data provider what their relationship is. The data providers, are able to change the data they have available. They're allowed to remove data from the Snowflake Data Marketplace. So generally, if there's a data set that you depend on, if it's a paid data set that you're paying the provider for, then obviously you'd want to understand what their terms are on keeping it there. Presumably, they wouldn't be just removing it if you're paying for it. But it is something to consider for data sets, because sometimes new data sets come, sometimes data sets do go away. So there's a consideration to keep in mind. And for any data sets that you're really depending on, you probably want to enter into a direct relationship with the data provider, still getting the data delivered through the Snowflake Data Marketplace for sure, but understand those kinds of terms. Another similar issue is in terms of schema changes. If they're going to be changing the schema or adding new things to a data shared schema is generally not an issue for the consumer, because you just see new columns, new tables. It doesn't generally bother tooling that you have pointed at it. But providers who change names of columns or remove columns, the best practice would be for them to notify their consumers in advance of that happening. Another question from a friend of mine is, after creating a database from a source, is that a virtual database like a Hive table? Sort of is the answer. So Hive is kind of like an abstraction that runs on top of data lakes. In this case, you're creating a database from the source is basically more of a pointer to the data provider's database. Now, that data provider, in their account, they may have loaded the data into Snowflake, into their account, or they may actually be pointing at a data lake themselves, where they might be keeping the data in Parquet or something like that in a cloud-based data lake, and using our external tables capability. And the data provider can share data through this mechanism that we use today, regardless of whether they've loaded the data directly to Snowflake or whether they're pointing at an external data lake with it's not a Hive. Well, actually, there's some integration with Hive Metastore, I believe, but it's kind of that kind of mechanism. So you, as the consumer of the data, you don't need to know exactly how the data provider is getting the data into Snowflake, or even if they're getting the data into Snowflake. You can access the data as the same way, regardless of how that data provider is making that data accessible through Snowflake. So that's a benefit for you. And then from your perspective, as we described, it is basically a pointer. So therefore, you don't need to worry about how the data is getting there. You don't need to keep it fresh. You don't have to pay to store it because the data provider is doing that already. All right. Well, so if you're interested in becoming a data provider yourself, there's some links you can follow to do that, or just contact Snowflake. And if you had any trouble following along, we do move quite fast in these hands-on labs. We have a lot of attendees who are existing customers who are very familiar with Snowflake. So if you had any trouble following along, or if you had any issues connecting to the databases once you click them in the marketplace, please feel free to use the recording, step through it in a little bit slower detail. And also, please reach out to Snowflake support, your Snowflake's account team, or any other method of contacting Snowflake, and we'd be happy to solve and walk through any of the issues that some of you were having still connecting to those databases. It's probably something simple. We can walk through that with you. And in any case, we do these webinars monthly. We change the data sets we use. We change the queries we use. We come up with new jokes. So please feel free to join this virtual hands-on lab again if you like. You'll never know what we might cover. So feel free to join us. We do these monthly. And there's the other links that we have in the resources tab to future webinars and other topics. And please, as we exit the webinar today, please fill in the survey. We appreciate your feedback on our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. See you guys next time.